Okay, well, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. Again, my name is Lisa Russell, and I work as a filmmaker, but I actually didn't go to film school. I started my career by getting my master's in public health, and I was a humanitarian aid worker working in Kosovo and Albania in 1999. And I had an experience there that sort of really taught me put into my head the power of storytelling. And what that was is that I had been asked to escort Kitty Dukakis, who's the wife of a pretty well-known US politician, to Albania, and we were at the US Embassy meeting with a bunch of women from Kosovo who were in charge of running different programs for women and children in the refugee camps in Albania. And as we were sitting at the US Embassy looking around the room, there were two women who looked really unhappy to be there. And when we went around the room, they said, you know, we are actually really unhappy with the journalists who are coming into the refugee camps. They're like, they're determined to tell this story, which was at the time an important story, but it was a story about rape being used as a tool of war. I just realized I have this picture. And they said, and what they're doing is they're coming into the refugee camps saying they basically have 3 days to tell the story. We need to speak to women who've been raped. Can you raise your hand if you've been raped? And they said not only was this disrespectful to what we were going through, and this is what she said that really kind of stuck in my head. She said, we fear that at the end of this war, we will no longer be remembered as Kosovar women, but as Kosovar women who've been raped. And for me, that working in the development field, you know, at the time in the late 90s, and looking at all the news reports, the PSAs and everything, I really started to critique and evaluate. And it's like, why are we telling these one-dimensional stories? The war that I'm working in and the people that I'm working with in Kosovo and Albania look nothing like what I'm seeing on television. And it made me want to tell stories differently. So I embarked on a kind of what I think now is an insane idea, which was that I became a self-taught filmmaker. I learned everything on my own. I didn't go to film school, didn't take workshops, but I basically learned from other filmmakers. I learned how to edit, I did everything. And so since then, I've basically been going around the world with UN NGO agencies, directing, producing, writing, shooting, and editing short films, and I love kind of what my career has turned into. But at the same time, you know, I would go and I would tell these really kind of intense health stories about maternal health, obstetric fistula, unsafe abortions, the impact of war on young people. But at the same time, I would, you know, I'd be in these places loving the people that I get to meet and everything. And so my African artist friends would say to me, we love that you come here, that's great that you come here, but why is it when you come to Tanzania, you just want to show the bad parts of Tanzania? I was like, well, you're right, but I get hired by UN NGO agencies and I'm telling global health stories, so, you know, what am I supposed to do? Like, show poor people smiling? Like, that's not the answer. So at the same time of loving my career, I also struggled ethically with what I was doing. I was asked to speak on the first Social Good Summit on a panel called The Power of Film, and I knew that they wanted me to talk about the work that I had done around maternal health and how my film had raised awareness and raised funding and all this stuff, but I really started to think about it, and I was like, you're right, film is very powerful. So I asked difficult questions. I was like, if film is so powerful, who has the right to be telling these stories? Like, am I the right person to be going to Africa to tell stories about African women? Would a filmmaker from South Africa be more qualified? What if that filmmaker was a man who had never left South Africa, and I've traveled around speaking to women around the world about these various issues? So I struggled ethically, and I really walked, like 3 times almost walked away from my career, because I never wanted to be seen like the journalist in Kosovo who were exploiting stories, you know, or doing what people call, you know, producing films that are referred to as poverty porn. And if you've ever seen this SNL skit, it's pretty, like, it hurts a little bit because I feel like it was a little personal. But what I've in thinking about this, being worried about it, struggling, I've come to realize that really what I have to think about, or what content producers need to think about, is sort of the imbalance of power. Because when you come in with really expensive camera equipment and you're from the US, Europe, or whatnot, and you are trying to tell humanitarian stories, there is a very clear imbalance between filmmakers and the people who are subjects of your stories. There's also, as I spoke about in my last workshop, there are no feedback regulations or systems for us to determine whether or not our films are effective, whether they're respectful, whether they retain the dignity of the people we're filming. We just don't have those feedback mechanisms available. And then also, you know, there is no big conference on responsible storytelling. There's no real big critique and discussion, because when you're talking about humanitarian filmmaking, you're assuming that people are doing it with good intentions, which a lot of people are, but good intentions don't always translate into responsible work. So what I've done is I've gone out to really think about how do we be sensitive to this imbalance of power? And I came across this great charter of storytelling rights that was put together by a university in Australia. And basically it's set up like the UN Charter, where it talks about the storytelling rights of the people whose stories we're telling. It's very simple. There's 8 articles. I'm not going to read them all, but I can tweet them if you want to find me on Twitter and share them with you. But basically it's set up and it's talking about, you know, different rights. And I really actually like this one, which is the person is not the problem is the problem. So why are we framing and branding people in certain countries as sort of like, you know, it's their fault that the AIDS crisis is so, you know, serious here, when it's really, it's bigger than that. It's systemic, it's a different type of problem. So I'll skip through that. So basically, I've been looking at, so if we know that poverty porn and exploitative storytelling is not responsible, how do we change the narrative to make more responsible stories? And what I've done is I've said, well, let's look at other sectors. Other sectors do storytelling too, they do it differently. So the innovation and technology sector focuses on solutions instead of problems. So if, for example, you know about the soccer, I forget what it's called, socket maybe? It's a soccer ball that when it's played, it stores kinetic energy, and then it has a port and you can stick a attachment to it and it becomes a light for children to do homework, for example. That story is not focused on the number of children around the world who don't have access to electricity or light. It's focused on the incredible innovation that has allowed children to be able to do homework. And then also what I am deeply involved in is working with socially conscious artists. And what I realize in working with these type of artists, which are often entrepreneurs, teaching artists, performers, you know, filmmakers or whatnot, focusing not just on global development topics, but they deal with racial justice issues, social justice issues, is that they change the narrative from one of charity to evoke pity, which is what I feel the global health messaging was about when I started my master's. We feel sorry for these people, donate, these poor children, to one of justice. So we're reframing global health as more of a social justice issue. And because of that, I've worked really hard to sort of bring socially conscious artists into the global development space. So I launched in 2014 an initiative I call I Sell the Shadow, which is based on a very popular quote by a civil rights activist named Sojourner Truth, which is, I sell the shadow to support the substance. She used to sell photographs of herself to fund her civil rights advocacy work. And what we do is we bring different artists in for performances and creative workshops. So I've done a beatboxing battle for girls' education for Gordon Brown's town hall meetings. We've done spoken word poetry, we've done steppers, we just bring in different performers, in addition to not just being sort of token performers on stage, but we also facilitate workshops. Because there is nothing more powerful than to engage young people in a conversation about something they would consider boring, like reproductive health, than to say, we're doing a film workshop, we're doing a DJ workshop, come in, let's do this workshop, creative workshop together, and then you integrate sort of the global health topic within that program. The other thing that I'm about to launch next week, no, 2 weeks, is an online campaign called Create 2030, which is a self-standing campaign, and I welcome kind of conversations with people who work either as content producers or at institutions. But the idea is to, there's a 5-minute creative video that goes along with it, but it's really to engage artists in helping meet the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And what we would do, for example, is organizations that are working on women's health stuff, could on International Women's Day make a call out for creative content, put it online, ask artists, ask content producers who already have material to share it, tag it with Create 2030. All of a sudden we have a map of different sort of artists globally who are producing content on different issues, and these agencies, if it goes well, could help create maybe partnerships or contract artists to do work with them if they like the work. I also talked briefly about Story Shifter, which is a new entertainment platform for the social good that will house creative content about global health development topics and then be driven on the backside by machine learning and data analytics to be able to give some sort of feedback mechanism for, again, the type of content we create that we currently don't have feedback mechanisms for. Another, a good example is I produced a poetry-based video called Mother's Cry. It's about climate change, and it features one of New York City's most renowned youth poets. And we got it premiered on Slate Magazine during the 2015 SDG Summit. And what that was is that our intended audience was to get young people of color in the United States to talk about climate change, because it's, as we know, very abstract, and it used poetry as sort of a storytelling device to do that. So Story Shifter, for example, might house content like this to really expand our reach of global health messaging into a wider, more diverse population. I'm going to fly through this because I know I don't have a lot of time, but historically, if we looked at the role of artists, they've been very important in a lot of social movements, and what they are able to do, as the UN, as my UN friend told me, is everything we're told the UN isn't allowed to do. So we can be emotional, we can be bold, we can be visionary, we can be, we can try to really make things pop and be popular. And so that's on the front end. So when we talk about responsive storytelling and talking about the content we're producing, that's sort of one element of it. Working with different storytellers, different artists to really get messages out. But one of the things that we don't talk about too much, and that is a big concern of mine because I've been working in this sort of lane for a while, is how do we build institutional credibility for artists and storytellers in global development? Like right now it's kind of trendy, the whole storytelling and UN or global health storytelling, but it's being driven by people who don't know the craft. And it is really a craft. When I say it took me 3 years to learn filmmaking, it's because it's not easy. And I was, because I'm in New York, I do a lot of work at the UN. I was involved in this sort of, everyone here knows SDGs, I'm assuming? Yeah, okay. I was involved in the town hall meetings to create the language for the SDG outcome document, and I was only one of 2 artists who were in the town halls. And when they came out with the final document, out of, and I counted, 15,868 words in the SDG outcome document, arts and artists are never mentioned, and creativity is only mentioned twice. So right now, what I feel is that everyone's excited about artists, but we're still being looked at as sort of either token performers, if they're live musicians or what, come and open an event for us, a fundraising event or whatnot, but you're never inviting us to sit at the table. We can never be part of the conversations or the decision making, and I feel strongly that needs to change because we have our own language, as every industry does. The UN has their own language, artists have their own language, researchers have their own language, we have a certain language, and we have a certain work culture. And if you try to create programs for somebody like, a subculture, and you don't understand it and you're not consulting with people from that community, you can miss the mark, which is what I've seen numerous times. I've seen, again, I cannot stress this enough, that there's an excitement around arts and storytelling, which is great, but I'm watching it and pulling my hair out because it's just not, it's the analysis or where they are is so at the beginning, and there's so much that needs to happen that I feel that if it's not done well, it has the potential for backfiring, and you're going to create a lot of tension between creative communities and global health and development institutions. And the best example I can share with you is sort of what recently happened with H&M. H&M did the Monkey Boy disaster, right? Which to me is mind-blowing. Like, how can you go through so many departments to actually get to print something that is so blatantly racist without talking, like nobody who's the photographer, the casting agent, the press person, the whatever, nobody caught it. So I actually wrote to the communications people now at H&M, and I was like, listen, I know a lot of great artists and racial justice people, and I'm sure we could create a committee and we can like review your stuff before you want to put it out and just make sure it's, you know, it's accurate and ethical and everything. And they're like, well, no, thank you, we're not really interested. And then like a month later, they come out with this legal case against a street artist because they say that street art should be able to not have copyright protection. And so that backlashed, and now like artists everywhere hate H&M, and it just backlashed. But if they had consulted with an artist about this move, they would have been told very quickly and very clearly that that's not a great thing. So similarly, if you're doing creative content, like even the presentation today, I was like, it was so visually interesting and it was wonderful, and I forget the name of the, McCann? Is it McCann? Visually beautiful, like everything. You know, logos of all the UN agencies were displayed, but I was like, who created the content? Who were the content producers? There was no filmmaker mentioned, no photographer, no nothing. And I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying that this is an example of how artists do not have institutional credibility. Nobody thought of crediting the content producers. And we're not always celebrities, we're not always ad agencies. We are, you know, our survival depends on our name and our you know, our work. So just some quick recommendations. If you do work for an institution, maybe it's time to review, like you would your diversity clauses or whatnot, review how you would work with artists, how you would engage with storytellers, create more opportunities like this for artists to come and participate and learn. There are many who are interested. I'm telling you, I mean, I know endless. When I posted the flyer, I was telling Cam, it's such a cool flyer. Everyone's like, wait a minute. Like, what's this festival? Like, you know, we're always struggling for funding. Everybody knows this. Artists are always struggling to get paid and to get credit. Make sure you try to get them funding. Make sure you try to give them credit, and create more opportunities to change sort of the institutional way you do things to make it more artist friendly. Like I get contracts with USAID, I get contracts for the UN, but I have to write ridiculous proposals. They are not artist friendly. So you are dismissing the talent of a lot of people worldwide by making them go through such crazy, you know, proposal processes, which isn't what they're trained to do, or train them, one or the other. And then again, always give credit as you would to anybody else in this room, a funder, a researcher, etc. So thank you very much. Would love to stay in touch. Here's all my information, but I'm honored to be here, and thanks for having me. Thank you.